Am here. My name is Lola Brognano, and I am here today to discuss providing pregnancy and infant loss bereavement support. Just a little bit about me. I'm a licensed clinical social worker in private practice here in Tallahassee, and I mostly specialize in maternal mental health and kind of all that comes with that. So pregnancy and postpartum mood and anxiety, like postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety. I also specialize in some of the nuances of maternal mental health, which is birth trauma, which is very much on the rise, especially in context with COVID. And pregnancy and infant loss, and the fertility spectrum, including infertility and gestational carriers and surrogacy. I was asked today to come in to kind of talk about what it is to actually provide bereavement support. A little today of what we'll go over, a little bit of the maintenance is to please remember to keep your mute on. One of the things we are going to have is the questions and answers at the end, so it doesn't get too disjointed, and we'll try to keep up with the questions as much as we can, but we have that designated at the end. A little bit about me, and one of the other things I'd like to really take a minute and center on is that we are going to be talking about some vulnerable, heavy, possibly painful stuff today. It's a very sensitive, vulnerable topic, fragile. And with that, we want to be able to take care of ourselves as we go through this, okay? That's important. And you know how to take care of yourself, okay? If you have to step out for a minute and get some fresh air, if you need to possibly do some grounding, right? Okay, that's always highly recommended. You could practice perhaps the 5 senses, right? And try to just kind of ground yourself back into the moment, okay? We're here for the sake of time today. We have about an hour and a half, so I'll try to keep that in mind as we go along. But again, you are free to use the chat for the questions that you have throughout, and we will try to get them as best as we can. After the presentation is over today, I will be sending to Sandy and Chris a pretty compiled list of resources that can be very beneficial for you and for your families that you're working with. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. So as we talk today about pregnancy and infant loss, certainly people do not go into this preparing or thinking there is going to be loss. And how profound this is astronomical when we bring numbers into the mix. And we're not going to focus on the numbers. And that's not necessarily the point of what we're doing here today, but 23 million miscarriages happen a year, 23 million. And that turns to be 44 losses per minute. That's quite a bit if you think about that, 44 losses per minute. We have 1 to 2 women will experience repeat miscarriages. Okay, and as the more consecutive miscarriages happen, the increase starts to become more evident. We have about 2 million stillbirths a year, and that's about one every 16 seconds. One about every 16 seconds. Seem to be stuck on the slide. There we go. Okay. So what is perinatal loss? And so perinatal loss itself is any loss of pregnancy at any stage of pregnancy. So from the moment of conception to a few weeks after a live birth. Okay, and we're going to talk about what kind of feelings that can bring. And some of the types of losses that we have are miscarriage. You know, we've heard of that, and stillbirth. And we have chemical and ectopic and molar pregnancies, and we will talk about all of these. Neonatal death and terminations for medical reasons and abortions. And we are going to give space to all of these because these are all losses, and we're definitely going to include them all. So miscarriage is, the definition is the spontaneous natural loss of an embryo or fetus before the 20th week of pregnancy. And depending on kind of where you look, your information, it can be 10% to 40% of pregnancies. And a lot of that is because, a lot of women don't necessarily know a lot. They say up to 50% of miscarriages are unknown. Okay. And then we have stillbirths, and that is the death or loss of a baby before or during delivery. And in the United States, that is defined at or after 20 weeks gestation. And that, it has a little bit of room sometimes. Some states, it can be like 1 week difference, and it can make the difference between a miscarriage and a stillbirth. And you can define even more so the stages of, whether it was an early stillbirth or a later stillbirth. And for the purpose of today, we are just going to learn what they are to understand that they're all losses. And an ectopic pregnancy, probably a lot of us have heard of that. We might not know what it is, but it's when a fertilized egg implants somewhere other than the uterus. And it's usually in the fallopian tubes, usually called a tubal pregnancy. And this can happen 1 out of every 50. And this is and can be a life-threatening situation for the mother. Molar pregnancy is definitely a rare condition in which the pregnancy tissue grows abnormally and excessively. This is typically a chromosomal abnormality that occurs at the time of fertilization. Neonatal death is when an infant dies in the first 28 days of life. And this happens in about 4 in every 1,000 babies. And although we don't have time today, it deserves its own space, and it needs its own space to talk about the rampant racial disparities and inequities in medical and maternal mental health. And as on the slide here, there is much different numbers and statistics when it comes to women and non-white women and BIPOC women who, when it comes to their medical maternal care and their mental health care, they have different numbers. And non-Hispanic Black women are more likely to have a baby die than women of other races and ethnicities. Now, terminations for medical reasons, and some couples might decide to terminate a pregnancy due to a variety of reasons: severe birth defects, life-threatening health complications, genetic conditions. This is a loss, and often when it's termination for medical reasons, it is typically what we found is a wanted pregnancy, and it can be heartbreaking and devastating for parents. And we have abortion, elective abortion, and these are decision-based as well. All abortion, whether it's termination for medical reasons, is a decision that people make. And sometimes women undergo abortions for many reasons that are not medically related, and they are for their own reasons. And it can be anything from, including not limited to, the majority of women who are having abortions have already had children. So perhaps they cannot have more children, are not able to provide the care. Their social determinants have changed. There could be a lot going on. So many personal reasons that go into this, but for whatever reason, abortion is emotionally challenging. It is a challenging decision for women. And an abortion myth number 1 is that most women feel shame and guilt, when in fact, the number 1 emotion that women say they feel is relief. And so a good quote to kind of remember about loss, and when it comes to very sensitive loss, is that we give the person who is grieving permission to express their feelings without fear or criticism or judgment. And this especially because if you think about it, women's bodies, women's decisions are political warfare. And this is like the number one place for that to be. And when it comes to this, even when we're talking about loss, when it comes to terminations of any kind, even ones for medical reasons, women are especially feeling isolated and alienated because if they go to a support group, and we'll talk about those, oftentimes they feel bullied out of there because we'll have women and birthing individuals in here trying to talk about how much they've wanted this child or what it was like to lose this wanted child. And you have someone else having a different experience in there, talking about how they had to decide to terminate their pregnancy. And there can be some dynamics and feelings about that. And it's unfortunate, it's unfortunate because loss is loss, but we have understood and learned and tried to create space for everybody so that a lot of times support groups can have terminations for medical reasons just for them so that they have that place. And like this dude, Alan said, this fella said, without fear of criticism or judgment. And so why is this, loss specifically vulnerable for a woman or a birthing person? And I'd like to add too, by the way, inclusivity is very important in our language. And I'm still on the learning journey as well in trying to move from maternal mental health to perinatal mental health. And not just women or mothers are people who give birth. So although today I'm going to be changing in and out in between birthing person and woman or mother, I'm likely going to be defaulting to woman or mother. But why is this loss specifically vulnerable? And it's because it comes with such nuanced feelings, right? Some of them being worry about our partner or children, guilt about her body shouldn't have protected the body, or me myself, I should have known better, I shouldn't have done this. A lot of inner blame, shame. And the loss is huge that we feel with this because it isn't always just, if we think about it, just the loss of our baby. It's not just the loss of her baby. It's the loss of so many things, the loss of future plans, the loss of the future idea of this baby and this family, of what that was going to mean. What does it mean to her as a mom if she doesn't have this baby anymore? Major anticipatory fear and anxiety could be starting about what if this happens again, right? Ooh, and jealousy can be a big one when it comes to seeing other women and their announcements and pregnant bellies. Very triggering, very triggering. So those can be quite profound feelings. And we're going to talk about how do we handle and how do we hold space for that. And so holding space is one of the two ways that we work with pregnancy and infant loss, grief in general. And holding space means to being physically, mentally, and emotionally present for someone, okay? And it means putting your focus on someone to support them and their feelings, okay? And an important piece to remember that is holding space is holding sorrow, okay? And holding space, like a concept that I like to think is like that I'm willing to go down this road. I don't know where it's going, okay? With this mom and her grief of this loss, I don't know where this is going, but I'm willing to go down it with you. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna hold that space and I'm gonna hold that sorrow. And so an important aspect of holding space is managing judgment while you are present. So if we have our own feelings about certain things, if we have our own feelings about terminations or abortions, this is very important in the work we do. And we don't have time for that so much today, except what I can say on that a little bit is that we have to check ourselves a little bit. We have got to know how to keep our beliefs, our feelings, nowhere at all in this person's space. We are holding their space. And if we take space, we couldn't possibly be holding space. And so if we do struggle with that, I would encourage you to find a way to find resolution to that. How can you resolve if you're not able to keep yourself out of the space and not be bringing in judgment? Okay, because holding space is kind of setting the tone, right, for the judgment-free interactions that you're going to have with someone very vulnerable and fragile. We want to create that forum for them to feel safer. You know, we're trying to move away from the word safe because people who might have trauma backgrounds, they don't necessarily ever feel safe. So we want to say safer. Sitting with someone in loving support, sitting with them as they're grieving and lamenting, right? And just being present. That can be uncomfortable for people, and we'll talk about that. Uncomfortable silence does not have to be uncomfortable. It can be holding space. We want them to feel seen, understood, heard, cared for, held, witnessed. So holding space can help someone feel less alone. And that is one of the biggest things we hear. Number one is women feel alone in this. And it's because our society as a construct does not feel comfortable and does not promote grief, does not in any way support it. We see it so presently when we're only, if we're lucky, at our places of employment, sometimes get 3 days for bereavement, when depending on if you work for someone and their policy and, you know, their way of looking at things. I've worked in the community myself and have had a client tell me once that after they were encouraged to please, you know, go and ask for some time off from work and take care of yourself, come back and grieve and recharge. She was told this is not a real loss for her miscarriage. It was not a real loss. Imagine that, right? Has anyone, please feel free to use the chat at any time. Has anyone ever heard from friends or family, anything like that being said, some kind of invalidating, not holding space? It's doing it again. My slides aren't moving.
Go back in the PowerPoint.
Hold on one sec, please. I can't figure it out. Can we see that?
You're still on holding space. Go back to the PowerPoint app, Lola, at the bottom of your computer.
Thank
and
you.
just click on it and then.
Sometimes, thank you. I apologize. I'm not sure. I think it's my internet. Can you see that? Because it says it's paused on my end.
It's on holding space.
Okay, it's on holding space.
There we go.
Okay. So thank you for your patience. This is Louise. And Louise is going to set us up for a little bit of someone's experience. It's a movie, and it's called Deafening Silence, and it's right on what we are talking about today. So here's Louise.
So we've been going to visit the grave of our baby girl nearly every day since she was born. It's always difficult. I mean, it's not something really you expect to be doing, going to visit the headstone of your baby daughter. It's always quite a surreal experience. Does it help? It's a difficult question. To an extent it does, yes. But what it also does is bring back the memories of that day. Mainly bad ones. But there are some good ones as well.
So some tips on holding space, okay? Holding space is something that kind of seems simple, right? We're just listening. But it takes a lot of practice, and it involves that, you know, kind of self-awareness and aftercare for the person that's holding space, okay? And we're going to talk a few about tips here, and keep in mind they're tips and they're meant to help guide as we go through this, and some tips on holding space, kind of what we were bringing up, holding space and holding sorrow. And here we're going to hold sorrow with Louise. And so what we do that is we refocus our listening, okay, to Louise. We don't jump into problem solving mode, right? We're listening. We're providing space. Do not center ourselves in this. We do not have a space in this. Our role we have, but we do not have space in this. Reassure them that you believe them, their feelings, all of them, and be open to whatever emotions might come up, okay? And that is, again, what willingness to holding space means. You don't know where it's going. You don't know what emotions it might bring up for them, but you're willing to go there without judgment. And so companioning is another part of how we show up and hold space, okay? It's another form of that. And the companioning model, okay, is anchored in the teach me perspective. It's definitely about learning and observing, okay? It's if you have a desire to support a fellow human, you must create that safe space, right? In order to be able to do that, for people to feel their feelings of loss. It's being present to pain. It's being present to that pain, holding sorrow and being present to that pain. And so this fella says, companioning is about being present to another person's pain. It is not about taking away the pain, because we can't really do that. There is no words, there's nothing we can do, there's nothing anyone can say or do that's going to take away that pain. And so some 11 tenets of companioning of the bereaved. These are just some tips, some tenets. And companioning is about being present, okay? Like we said, it's not about taking pain. It's about honoring spirit, honoring the heart. It's not about analyzing and fixing, being present, okay? It's about bearing witness to the struggles of others, not judging or directing those struggles. It's about walking alongside, not leading. Sorry, y'all. Kind of keeps doing that, and I will bring it right back. Okay, so here is my screen. Can everyone see?
Not yet.
Okay, not yet?
Nope. Nope.
Okay. It's up on my screen. All right.
Make sure you're sharing the PowerPoint screen.
Yeah, thank you. I'm trying to get back up. It's in a different position when I'm over here and it's not actually, hey, Crystal, can you come back in here? Okay, because the share screen, here we go. I believe it's right here, hopefully.
Yep. Mhm.
Thank you. It's different in, here we go. So Louise, her experience, she talked about the worst day. We're going to go in here and talk about how do we hold space for Louise?
Louise, do you understand? You don't have enough beds. You're going to have to go home.
Where you can fit some anyway.
I'm afraid not. We need to give priority to the women that are giving birth to live babies. Hoping to catch you before you left. How are you feeling?
Just want it all to be over.
I am going to see this through with you, and I'll be back for the birth. I'm sorry, Louise. I know it must be so difficult to take it all on board.
We're gonna have a cesarean.
Are you sure?
We've discussed it with the doctor. Please don't try and convince me to have a natural birth. We've decided.
Okay. I understand.
I was just so looking forward to saying hello to my baby daughter.
Louise, it might not make much sense now, but you still can say hello to your daughter.
Isabel Jenkins. No, I like.
Don't worry, sweetheart. Everything's going to be fine.
Thanks. We're just.
Make sure I have a peep at it on the way out.
Is
Okay, so everybody, we just saw a few different interactions from some of the workers, okay? We saw an original nurse talking. We saw another nurse, someone in the hallway. What is your experience or reactions to the workers? What did you hear? What did you feel was helpful, maybe not helpful? What are some of your thoughts and feelings and reactions to what we just saw? You can put that in the chat box. That'd be great. Kind of let us know your feelings. How did you feel about the nurse saying that we need the rooms for women giving birth to live babies? We do have one comment here. Thank you, that fathers in these situations are not given space to grieve sometimes. Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about that. And even time off to bond with a new child in certain environments, absolutely. But that is a big one, Jasmine. Yeah. Thank you, Jessica. That must have been devastating to the mom for the nurse to say that, right? You're in that moment. They're in that moment. This mother is in that moment and she's hearing babies crying and they're kind of doing the hush and rush. We got to get you out of here. We got to get you out of here. We don't care about this experience is what it can feel like because we've got live babies, you know? Yeah, right. A lot of the interactions were rude and not well thought out, very insensitive, less helpful and dismissive. Yeah. Did we hear the one, would we, if able, perhaps we can go back? I don't think I can. Let me see if I can go back. How about we play this one again. And let's see how we feel maybe about this one. Hopefully this is the right one.
Come in.
Hi, Louise. I'm Lucy. How are you feeling today? Can you just confirm your name? Louise Jenkins.
Date of birth?
10th of August 1980.
Any allergies?
What have you got it wrong? I'm sorry, Louise. I wish we had. I know it's tough. Really, I do. Try to focus on the positive things. At least you know you can get pregnant. Please, try and get some rest.
Oops. Okay, so let's talk about that. Does anybody have any feelings or reactions to that nurse? Yeah, let's get that up in the chat. So a couple of statements were said in such a very short period of time, completely insensitive. You know, however, right, she was nicer, but still very dismissive. And this is kind of what we're going to talk a little bit about today, right? How intention is not impact. Okay. She used a lot of language that the intention was meant to help. At least you try to think of something positive, right? Lack of empathy. That was not bearing witness, not paying attention to the body language, right? She wasn't paying attention to the mom's body language. All business. Name, date, what's your date of birth? Sorry, you know? But yeah, and so one thing we'll bounce off that then, okay, is no acknowledging the loss. There we go. And we're going to talk a little bit about what to say. Everyone can see my screen? Okay. Some more helpful things to say, okay, more helpful are things like, I'm so sorry. I know this wasn't the outcome you were hoping for. Okay. And one of the big ones is, how best can I support you now? Okay. And over less helpful things to say, some of these things we heard here. Try to avoid the at least. Yeah. So we heard one there, right? At least you know you can get pregnant. Have y'all heard of any other ones? Any other at least statements? Yeah. And you don't have to be positive all the time. Hello, right? No, we don't. But there's a lot of at least statements, such as, right? At least you're young and you can try again. Not very helpful. A lot of the other ones that we try to stay away from as well are the God has a plan, or everything happens for a reason. That's not, again, something that can be helpful even when someone believes, right, has a particular faith. If someone is wanting a child, can't have a child, loses a child, that's not part of their plan. So in that feeling, they don't care about someone else's plan, and it's more hurtful. It's very painful. Okay. Can everyone see? Okay. Here is a little bit of practical advice, and practical really kind of being like, what can you say? What can you do? And this is the biggest kind of thing that I found, honestly, is just practical, just being a human, right? Listen for the words that carry the most emotion. Yeah, and repeat them back. That's what they're saying. They're using their own words. And invite them to tell you more. Tell me about that. Tell me about that. And another one is, how are you feeling and doing today, right? A lot of times we will get, how are you doing? Someone's going to say they're fine. I'm fine. I'm doing okay. They don't want to burden anybody. People they're worried. They're sick of hearing it because you know how it is, right? People get on with their lives. And we're not given the space. And so we don't know how to take the space when it comes to this. And of course, what can I do for you this morning? You know, when I worked doing some community work, one of my patients told me that one of the things that meant the most to them that I did that I would never have thought of was when I was leaving, I asked her, you know, would you like me to get you a blanket on the way out and kind of tuck you in like a burrito? And she said that it felt so warm, safe, you know, engulfing, right? Almost like that hug that we need from humans, right? So another thing that I found, I use this all the time. I use this statement all the time for when it comes to providing support, holding space, and companioning, is I know you're hurting, I'm hurting with you. Because honestly, there's just really nothing we can say or do. And sometimes when we can't find the words, it is okay to say that. I'm so sorry. I don't know what to say, but I'm here for you and I'm so sorry. If it's someone we know on a personal level, I am so sorry. I don't know what to say to make this feel better. There are no words, but I love you and I'm here for you. I'm so sorry for your loss. And we can say, I'm so sorry for your baby. As hard as that sounds, most all of lost parents want to talk about their babies. Some of them don't, and we respect that, and that's part of holding space. Today, let's talk about that, a little bit about holding space and providing support. We want to encourage them to talk about their child often and use their name. If they don't, let's help them come up with something. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that, but there are ways we can do that. We want to encourage them to have friends and family maybe come and help with errands, caring for other children in the home, right? That's a big one, you know, because it's important for them to have that time to grieve, to remember, to go through. There's semantics that have to happen after that, you know, the practicalities. Is someone going to have a funeral? Have they thought of that? It could be something you discuss. There's a lot that goes into that. One thing that we do sometimes in the healing work that we do when it comes to pregnancy and infant loss, sometimes we talk about a death certificate for a stillbirth, that this was real, born and died. We want to help them prepare a future template about what do we do about things like Mother's Day, Father's Days, right? That's going to come up. It's going to come up every year. Every time there's something, a birth date, a due date, a death date, we want to be able to help them know how to navigate, okay? And so we kind of open the discussion to, you know, grief is a continuum. Okay, and we can be feeling and healing, and then one day a date show up and it can kind of just drag us back down. And so we kind of want to prepare for that. And because of the intensity and the isolation of this grief specifically, parents often benefit from finding others. Support groups are big. So obviously, you know, a lot of people know about like compassionate friends. That's very much a generalized grief group. A lot of parents in there, generalized grief. But perinatal loss has nuanced, ambiguous grief a lot of times. And so finding specific perinatal and infant loss grief groups can be very beneficial. And women especially finding support groups for themselves. And I'll talk a little bit about that. It is wonderful if we can get, the parents, the partners together. But we also find that women also have additional feelings sometimes related to their partner or their husband, and that it needs to have its own space or it won't be able to be discussed, explored, processed, and healed, okay? Depending on the situation. Sometimes women have residual feelings about how their partner might have responded to the decision, to the news, to the loss since it's occurred. Sometimes the decision making, a woman might feel like her voice wasn't heard and perhaps her husband's was. So women often find their own groups to be very beneficial, but there are some less, but there are some for fathers and partners, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Support groups have been associated to have decreased symptoms of some of the things that we talked about in the beginning. What kind of feelings can there be? Shame, guilt, depression, and anxiety. An unhealed pregnancy and infant loss grief can turn into some perinatal mood and anxiety things later down the road. Some ways that we can support, right, the whole family, okay? As we go out, we don't only work with moms, we don't only work with babies, even if that's our specialty. All those come with families and partners and grandparents and siblings, and they deserve a space too. And I believe someone had that in the chat, Jasmine, I believe, was talking about fathers often being overlooked, sometimes invisible completely. So we want to encourage, right? We want to encourage that partner to receive their own support, okay? So because they have that same grief, it might not be expressed the same, but they have grief, okay? And it's definitely not the same as someone who has had the pregnancy themselves. It's a very different grief, but we don't do the comparison of grief is grief, and we allow all grief. We want to ensure that that partner or co-parent does not feel that invisible part, okay? And that they're not only their only role being to support the grieving mother. That will start to become so heavy themselves that they could start to have symptoms of their own postpartum mood or anxiety, which many people don't know. 1 in 10 dads have postpartum anxiety, and some of it has to do with not being able to have their own space and it becoming clinical. Of course, we want to be aware that there could be dynamics between partners, right? That there could be underlying things already there that have nothing to do with us really, or even this, that's only going to nuance and complicate it even more. We want to be kindful, mindful of their experience as a couple and as individuals, okay? Depending on where we work, okay, policy and procedure has rules, regulations about how long or often we can continue to check in with a patient or a client. Go ahead and follow those guidelines. That can be very beneficial to people. Provide resources, and we'll talk a little bit about that so that they know what's out there. Some people love reading. They definitely have resources. Podcasts now are like the thing. Not everybody wants to sit down and read, and moms especially, right, can be really busy, and the only time they can do anything might be when they're doing laundry. Well, great, let's put in some earbuds and let's listen to a podcast, right? And things like that, okay? We could encourage them to create and think about rituals and memorials and what does that mean to them? Because really what we want to start encouraging, okay, is creating a way for this child, this baby, to remain a part of this family, okay? And we're going to help them do that. Some ways to support the other family members, okay, is children and families, children and siblings. You want to encourage the parents to, kind of ask them how they feel about this. Okay, now mind you, depending on the gestation, if we have a very early miscarriage or an earlier stillbirth, that perhaps, depending on the age of the children, right, the awareness might not be there. And with all things coming with children and adolescents, we want to use age appropriate language, and we want to use age appropriate approaches. So when we're talking about younger kids, verbal, intellectual conversation might not make sense. They might not get it. They might not receive it. You might use activity, right? Activity that they do understand. Okay, like creating projects and art crafts and things like that. And we'll talk about that. If as appropriate, age appropriate, explain the purpose and the importance of grieving. We do not want to send the messages that we cannot have feelings about this and hush it down and there's no space for it. That might be true in the world, but we've got to create this new culture, and we're a part of that. We've got to get patients and families talking about their own grief and in their own home, within their own families, and letting children and their partners and their people know it's okay to cry and feel this. We have to feel this or we can't heal this. And one of the ways that we can do this is by creating those rituals and memories. And we almost all have them. We certainly have our own cultural traditions. We have our own religious rituals and things, and our own holidays, for example. Shoot, when we have Christmas or Ramadan, any of our own holiday traditions, we have those. And so we can bring in memories and create new memories and new traditions. So if we have ornaments on a tree, where all of we have one living child and they have an ornament with their name on it, we're going to encourage, perhaps we can put an ornament with your baby on the tree as well, because they are a part of this family, right? And we can help them kind of figure it out. What if they don't have a name yet? What if it was early? We can help them. We can help them. We can say, what were you going to name? What were you going to name your baby? Some people name their baby Angel because it's an angel baby and they might not have had one. Or if they've had recurrent pregnancies, some of them call them baby A, baby B. Okay. Sometimes we can't even get those, sometimes depending. And I've gotten creative and I've said, we're going to find something. We're going to find something. And I explored and I explored. I asked questions. Okay. Due dates, birth dates. And those are things that we can do with that as well. And it came to be, we came up with a name for this client's baby. She named her baby Baby Blue. Baby Blue, because that was the day she found out the gender. So that was the only thing she knew. Okay. That was the only thing. And so we said, Baby Blue it is. So we used the color blue. Okay. We named the baby Blue. We made our arts and crafts. Every year, Baby Blue is on the Christmas tree along with everybody else's. Okay. And there's a lot of ways we can do things like that. We can create memory boxes. Okay. We can encourage them to plant a memorial tree. We can display an angel statuette, an angel figurine. There's a lot of Etsy things and Pinterest things where we can order necklaces and even like memory bracelets where if we know the birth date, we know the birthstone. We can use that. We can use that. If we have a sonogram, we can frame that. I use that as well with a client to, every time they have a family photo, that baby is in the photo. Every one of them. The photo in the frame is a part of every family photo. I've had people get tattoos, birth dates, names, right? I'm sure you can think of some as well. Does anybody have any ideas of anything right? Any kind of ritual or memory that could be beneficial? There's quite a few, you know. And here is another way to honor them after what we were just kind of bouncing off of is birth months have flowers. I never knew that. I think this is beautiful, beautiful. You can show up maybe with a, right, to your family, to your mom with a plant, right? You could encourage them to plant their own. You can encourage them, right, to maybe dry the leaves, press them, and they can make it into a bookmark that they can put into one of their favorite books. One of the biggest things, really, though, out of all this is that the care workers themselves, y'all, have to have care for yourself too. And I don't know how much a lot of times health workers, community workers know how much of an at-risk they are to what we call secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. We are seeing and hearing some pretty heavy stuff sometimes, right? When we work with birthing individuals, it can be pure joy one moment met by total devastation and loss the next moment. You're there, you're a part of that. We have to hold space for people over and over and over and over. What do we do with that, all this? Where are we supposed to go with this, right? We might not have the training that maybe a therapist does on what to do with that all day, right? So let's talk about that. Let me see if I can send some tips your way on how to care for yourselves as you do this, because it's so important, right? One way is possibly looking and seeing if you can find some extra trainings on self-care and what is secondary trauma. People who are at risk of secondary trauma, right? Therapists, community workers, labor and delivery nurses, EFTs, firemen, firewomen, all people who work with trauma and crisis, right? And loss. And so we have to take care of ourselves. And if we don't have the training on how to do that, we got to come up with it ourselves and look for it. And these are some of the ways. If you're someone who likes to write, right? Or, you know, it doesn't have to be so structured or scripted. It really can be just reflective. It can be situational, you know. It could be a stream of consciousness where you're just kind of letting it go, and it can be pretty amazing where it takes you, you know, holding space for yourself, if you will. Engage in non-work hobbies. Oh, Lord, we've got to have a balance away. We've got to be able to get away from it, okay? So one of the ways to do that especially is we want to use our paid leave. We need to use our paid leave. Okay, we need to have boundaries with clients as much as we have empathy and we care, and that sometimes is our strength and our weakness as we care too much. And so we definitely have to have boundaries with clients. We can have empathy, but we can't be available at 3 a.m. if that's not our role. Okay, all right, if that's not our role, if perhaps we're not a death doula or a hospice social worker on call, there's not many roles that would fit under where at 3 a.m. if a client's calling you, why you would be picking up that phone, okay? And that also goes into helping the clients, right? When we're supporting them, if we give them those resources, including a referral to a therapist, who to talk to when you have 3 a.m. moments, right? Okay. So regarding taking care of yourselves, you want to turn off that work email, okay? Outside of work hours, you need to make time for relaxation, make time for fun hobbies, have a new one, And definitely engage in positive friends and relationships and family, you know. See if you're someone who can try to remain present in your own life and find the gratitudes that you have, the blessings that you have. It is absolutely okay. And please give yourself permission to say that you can be grateful that you have your babies. You can be grateful that you have not had to experience this. You are allowed to have that while not diminishing someone else's emotions. They can be completely independent of each other. And I don't know if y'all know what EAP, depending where you're employed, you could have employee assistance programs, and those can be very beneficial. They are time limited. They're pretty solution focused, brief intervention, but it can be very helpful if you've had a very hard case, okay? And maybe you're struggling a lot. What to do, what to say. You don't know what to do, you don't know what to say, and you're bringing it home, or you're personally being triggered because perhaps, and a lot of us do, have our own lived experience, right? We ourselves could have this loss ourselves and possibly be triggered and activated by someone else's experience. And if we have not healed ours, it can be triggered at any moment. And so part of, right, being able to hold space and not take that space is to not come into that space. We have to take care of ourselves. And one of that is making sure you're able to leave, whether it's your own feelings negatively or your own lived experience from coming in and taking that space. So know your triggers, okay? Know those triggers. Find ways to feel centered and grounded. Right? Practice those grounding techniques that you know. The 5 senses can be very helpful, especially when people are feeling distressed and overwhelmed, right? We try to encourage people to look around and name 5 things that they see, 4 things that they can touch, okay? 3 things that they can smell, 2 things they can hear, 1 thing they can taste. Taste can be spit, saliva, that is a taste. And think about that. When we are feeling so consumed by grief, anxiety, anything, right? We're not being present, okay? And so we have to come down from that, including ourselves. Perhaps something happens and it's not until you get home, and then all of a sudden you're overtaken with this abreaction. You've been triggered, right? And the next thing you know, you're at a 10. You are so distressed, re-triggered. Try those 5 senses. Try to ground yourself. Get an ice cube, put it in your hand. Your brain will have to come to that cold sensation that suddenly landed on your palm. Move it back and forth in between your hands. Switch it hot, compress, cold, right? Put your feet firmly, flatly on the ground. Know that you exist on this planet. You are present here right now. Squish your toes through the carpet. You'll feel it. You can encourage your clients and patients to do this too, right? When they're talking and we're talking about how to hold this sorrow and this loss, okay? And so caring for yourself, Audre Lorde, caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation. And that is an act of political warfare, right? Political warfare, right? That's powerful. It's not self-indulgence and it's not selfish. It's self-preservation. And so I like to have this here because this kind of talks about, and this is a really powerful, okay, Cohen, I'll go ahead and read this, okay? It says, whether you lost your baby at 6 weeks, whether you lost your baby at 12 weeks, whether you lost your baby at 16 weeks, whether you lost your baby at 20 weeks, whether it is your first loss, whether it is your second loss, whether it is your third loss, whether it is your 4th loss, whether you have not had a child, whether you already have a child, whether you have 2 children, whether you have 3 or more children, whether you lost your baby in your teens, whether you lost your baby in your 20s, whether you lost your baby in your 30s, whether you lost your baby in your 40s, whether you lost your baby through IUF, whether you lost your baby through unplanned pregnancy, whether you lost your baby through planned pregnancy, whether you lost your baby through surrogacy, that's one. Your pregnancy loss matters, your grief matters, your tears matter, and you matter. And I wanted to really kind of sit for a moment on the last one on the yellow side on the left that says, whether you lost your baby through surrogacy. Can anybody kind of think of why that might be included on there? Why would surrogacy be listed in loss? That might be a little confusing, but why would surrogacy be on there? Yes. Yes, thank you. It is still a loss. Yes, it was still a baby. Yes. And a lot of people don't realize, right, that the surrogate themselves, right, could absolutely feel a loss after that, carrying a pregnancy this whole time. And a lot of people don't know that surrogates can often actually feel, even though they've chosen, perhaps, right, love the process, and all for it, supportive. I am a surrogate for you. Here is your baby. Surrogates can absolutely be diagnosed with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. They can have postpartum depression. Of course they can. They were pregnant and then they weren't. It's not just the want. It's all of the factors that have the risk factors that create that. And the one being of why no woman is immune to maternal mental health issues is because of the hormone thing. And if you attach it with the risk factors. So a surrogate might not have risk factors. However, they might. They've come from a place, right? They're an individual. They might have risk factors themselves. But, you know, as the whole person, the hormones, they were pregnant, now they weren't. And that's going to have hormonal indications, okay? Yes, thank you, Alba. Still carrying the baby for 9 months and can become attached, even if still supportive to provide, right, the adoptive family or the family who is on board with this. And so there were a couple of questions, okay, that I'm going to see if I can try to go up to. Something that someone said on here, Elizabeth said, that was really caught my eye was, at least they caught it early, quote unquote, right? Like it was a disease. Yeah. Oh, if someone hears this, right, our language, we're not feeling heard, right? Our experience is becoming diminished to nothingness, right? Like it was a disease, right? A lot of not acknowledging losses, all of them, right? We know how people feel about abortion. You chose that. That's a word, chose. We're in the field, we're trying to move away from chose and use the word decided, okay? Because all abortions are typically a decision-based, okay? And we want to give it all the deserve that it needs. Let's see. Dr. Harrison said a recent TV show depicted a surrogate who had lost a child in an accident and became a surrogate to give the gift out of guilt out of their own child. What did you feel about that episode? Do you feel it was honoring their experience? Right. Yes, that gave me chill bumps as well. Out of guilt for their own child. Wow, but powerful. Right? And it's all complicated. It's all nuanced. Right? So let me see here. Crystal, if you could go through and see if there's any questions or comments that would be helpful as we go to the next slide. Okay. Get there. Okay, so here's just a few resources, okay? And this is a very, very condensed list for the purpose of today, okay? If a family is going through, a mother in a family is going through a pregnancy or infant loss, of all the perinatal losses we talked about today, and is expressing, right, their grief and all of the additional things that can come with it, right? A lot. It's not just the grief of loss of baby. It can be a lot of other things, such as how she feels about herself. There can be a lot of that going on there as well. And one way we can help them is to send them to resources. Here are some. You can send them definitely to a local clinician. I'm one of them. This is my specialty. And RTZ, Return to Hope, is one of the most well-known that is specifically focused on perinatal and infant loss. And they have wonderful resources, support groups, free webinars, support groups for everyone, including bereaved grandparents. Okay. The Star Legacy Foundation, well-known, very well-known, lots of really good support groups. The Miss Foundation, Mothers in Support and Sympathy. Postpartum Support International has so many support groups that are very specific, all led by trained and lived experienced clinicians. And all of the perinatal loss groups have their own, so that everyone has a safe space. And the Tears Foundation, that one tends to have local support groups. After today, I'm going to be sending to Chris and Sandy a more comprehensive resource list. It has books for families to read, even siblings and fathers to read, podcasts, ways to make memories. There's a section for community workers, self-care for y'all, including support groups, as few as they are. There are some, but I have them listed for y'all to go and talk about your own experiences. And how did I handle this? I didn't know what to say. I just sat there, right? Part of sitting and holding space can be in that uncomfortable silence and knowing, right? Kind of instinctually a little bit, like to read a person. It can be very soothing for someone to be able to just sit and not have someone else have to constantly fill. Okay, so yes, there is something to be said about sitting still. Okay, and then knowing when to kind of add some supportive statements and language. Okay. But this is going to be a very comprehensive list. It's got really, really amazing things on there. Everything from articles to trainings. There's many trainings that y'all have the ability to have free and paid. And then local resources here for us, not just national. Now, are there any other questions? I will see that there's a couple of things in here, but if there's any other questions, it can be specific to, do you have a specific question on how to handle something? Do you have a recent client maybe that is kind of perplexing you and maybe you're not really sure what to say or do or where to send them? This could be a great time.
I saw Lola, Arnica made a comment about straight business in her mind, no empathy. Can you give a little bit more insight on if a colleague has compassion fatigue? What are some signs and what resources or what they could do to help their colleague?
Thank you for that, Arnica. Compassion fatigue is real. And that is part of what we were talking about today, right? If we are kind of not holding our boundaries so much, okay, and we aren't taking care of ourselves so much like we should, and it starts to become heavier and heavier for us. Some of those things we talked about, okay, would be very beneficial. Like, first I'll talk about what does it look like? What are some of the signs? So a lot of the signs we look at when we look at other people when they're overwhelmed and burnt out can be the same. Change in moods may be a little bit more irritable. They seem to care less in the sense that it's more mechanical almost, right? Like numbers, and their language changes maybe from I have to go to this client versus I get to go see this client. Maybe they're calling in more. Right? Their affect, their demeanor, okay? Right? They're saying maybe to you and to colleagues that perhaps I just go home and I don't really do anything. I used to love to paint, but I don't really do that. Those are some pretty good signs. They could also be saying they're depressed. They could also be saying they're losing sleep. They could also be saying their appetites have changed. So I guess the same kind of symptoms, right, that we look for other people, that things are different, we look for those with them as well. And we would encourage EAP. Is there an employee assistance program available that gives us free support? Do we have local support groups here? If not, perhaps our colleagues can create one. Perhaps you can help lead your colleague to a national support group that you know that perhaps is on your list that you get here, or you do your own Google search, okay? Perhaps you go to your place of employment and say, hey, we work with this population and care for them. We need you to care for us. What can we put in place for that to happen, right? Take your time off. Know how to have assertive communication to your supervisor and say, hey, I'm not doing so well now. I need you to work with me to help me so that I can provide the care that I know I can and that you know I can, right? Did anybody see anything else? Did I miss any specific question?
Jasmine has a question about maternal interview process, about her specific maternal interview process.
Let's see if I can find that. Is it at the bottom?
Mhm.
It says, thank you, wants a copy of the PowerPoint and the resources. Wait, Jasmine, okay. Oh, you have a question about your maternal interview process and guidance with that, but I may have to, okay, go ahead and ask the question. I'll see if I can answer it. I will absolutely send the PowerPoints, okay? And you will get that list of resources. If Jasmine, if you want to ask the question directly, I can see if I can answer that in here in context to here. I am available for all of you if you need consult, right? Okay, about a specific client maybe. If you know for a fact that your clients could benefit right now from a professional, Chris and Sandy will have my information and I can put that in the chat as well right now. This will be my email, so please go ahead and write this down so that you have it, okay? And then I will also give you my text, okay? And text is the easiest way because I can be in session or doing webinars or facilitations. I can check text, but answering the phone can be very difficult. And you can contact me in that way anytime. Anything else, Crystal? Do you see anything?
I'll take a quick look again.
Jasmine, I might be able to help you with that for sure. I feel confident we would be able to find something. And I know, I'm working with Chris and Sandy on a couple of committees, and that might be something that perhaps all of everyone can look at, right? Is the process what everyone would like it to be, right? How do y'all know what is the next step if you're working with someone, and where do you go, right? That could be something that we absolutely kind of focus on after this. Otherwise, does anybody have any last minute questions? Anything they'd like to add? Any feedback? Let's see. Okay, here's Jasmine.
So I see that Jasmine made a comment earlier about the fathers not given space. I know you went over about holding space. Is it a little bit different for holding space for fathers, or is there anything specific or resources or anything that can help support fathers?
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, right, Matt, in our society, men and women are socially constructed to deal with emotions, express emotions differently. And when you go on an individual basis as well, men and women grieve differently. And so when we're holding space for partners or men or husbands, okay, we want to keep that cognizant, okay, that everyone experiences things differently, and to try to hold space by coming down to where they are and making sure they know that they are not invisible, that they have resources as well, and encourage them to talk about their feelings. And a lot of what they talk about when you give them that safe space, for example, over at Mount St. Sinai's out in California, I believe, they have a hand to hold project, and it's a perinatal and infant loss program. And they have a specific kind of program for fathers, okay? And because they need their space, they grieve differently, they do not express it differently. A lot of times they seemingly move on, okay? Whereas the woman or the mother is not, and it, right, okay? And a lot of times what they do express when they feel safe is complete helplessness, okay? Helplessness. And if you think about it, does that make sense? They're not carrying the pregnancy. They couldn't do anything. They're fixers in nature, constructed to be fixers in nature. And so they just want to take this away, and they can't fix it. They feel helpless mostly. And that goes into how they feel as a man. It's so nuanced. It's very nuanced. So we want them to know, validate, you have the right to your feelings, even if they're different. We're going to try to help you find your space. Here's some resources, here's some books, here's some support groups, and just kind of lead them that way. And keep yourself available to them too. Don't just keep deflecting to mom, okay? So Jazz, the process of actually securing an interview is difficult. Sometimes I talk to them, but in the process of setting up the time, they lose interest or it falls through. How do I set up a tone? Yeah, that can be difficult, right? Trying to get someone to show up. Okay. And for example, in my private practice, that's not so much a thing, right? Because they're coming to me. They're coming to me, right? I'm not having to talk them into or try to get them to me. They're already coming to me knowing I need to talk about this. So yeah, you're right. On the front end, that can be very, very difficult. And a lot of it can be about making that connection and making them feel heard and letting them know, right? Grief is a continuum, and you need someone to be in the boat with you, right? That's going to help you guide the very, very heavy and confusing waves that are going to be coming. Okay. You're going to help her put on her life jacket, and you're going to teach her how to row together, okay, so that she's not alone, and she's going to learn how to relying on you and hopefully soon partner to be able to navigate through this, okay? And so a lot of times it can really be, I know that moms need support long-term through this because grief is a continuum, and some days are better and some not. I would love to be able to see you tomorrow so that I can help you kind of figure this out and you're not alone. I'll be here for you. Can you commit to that, to healing this? And a lot of times they're going to say yes, especially when you connect to them in that way, right? Did that sound okay? Kind of a way to start? Thank you. Thank you. With the training. Okay. Was there one thing right at the end? Okay. Of course, I could have many more suggestions on how to do that. Okay. And you can send me questions. Please feel free. I know we're kind of right at time a little bit. But ways I felt honestly is I'm very, just like how I am here. I'm this authentic and genuine. I bring my personality a little bit. Okay. Who I am is present. I'm like this with I've had students, I've had student interns, I've had mentees, interns, clients, and I'm mostly the same. I come in with a genuine authenticity that I am here and see you, and I am going to be here for you and with you, okay? And that is really good. I'm so glad everybody enjoyed this, and this kind of hopefully can maybe bloom and blossom into something else, because as you can see, right, we can pick out anything about this, because I mean, just any one topic we talked about really does deserve its own space. And so possibly we could consider that for the future, maybe expanding it a little bit more. But otherwise, I think we're right on time. And I think we'll just end there. If anybody has anything else to say, Chris or Sandy, anybody have anything they'd like to add? Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure for me to be here. I had such a great time. You were so engaged, right? You could see how some of those interactions, right, that Louise had was holding space and some was not holding space, right? Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you, Lola. And as Lola said, she will send us the information, the resources she referenced, as well as the PowerPoint presentation. And we will make sure that we send that out to you. We also did record this training. So if you were not able to get on right away, you will have an opportunity to view the whole training, and we will get that out to you as well. Thank you, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and a restful weekend.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye.